Just want to say good evening to everyone joining us at this time and welcome aboard as we get ready to bring you live coverage of these events here. Another special activity organized by the Ministry of Education as we continue to focus on children with disabilities. We invite you to join us for this panel discussion here at the University of the West Indies. Pleasant listening, pleasant viewing.
My name is Ivana Ojeda, a special education trainer with Peace Corps Response, working alongside the Special Education Unit at the Ministry of Education. I am honored to act as chairperson for today's panel. Students with special needs in the community. The second event in our first ever week of public sensitization aimed at understanding and demystifying students with special needs in our community. Please join us in standing for an opening prayer. Kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Verse of Dominica's national anthem. Thank you. And now we welcome Ms. Octavia Timothy, Coordinator of the Special Education Unit at the Ministry of Education, to provide an overview of today's panel discussion. Please welcome Mrs. Octavia Timothy.
Under the theme, Celebrating Abilities, Embracing Diversity. And although we are looking at children with special needs, we are also looking at the broad picture of persons with disability, and that is the umbrella under which children with special needs fall. So the panel discusses diversity and the empowerment of individuals with diverse ability. This discussion will bring together experts, advocates, and individuals with lived experiences to share light on the challenges, opportunities, and best practices in creating a society that values and embraces diversity in all forms. And misconceptions, emphasizing the need to focus on abilities rather than limitations. We'll also explore the significance of inclusive education field on the panel this afternoon, so we are going to look at the significance of inclusive education in providing equal opportunities for individuals with diverse abilities. The workforce, and I know some of our advocates here can talk about that, and we'll also talk about, the panel will also acknowledge environment for individuals who are different, and we'll share whether we have any success stories, and we should have some success stories contributed to our society. And so we are hoping today that the panel will inspire and empower those who are listening.
At this time, it is my honor to introduce our moderator for today's event, Open Campus in Dominica. She holds a doctoral degree in higher education leadership and management, a master's degree in communication studies, and an undergraduate degree in public speaking, leadership, and education. In her spare time, Dr. Joseph enjoys gardening and reading. She hails from La Plaine, but has her home in Cochrane. Please welcome our moderator, Dr.
Good evening, everyone. Those who are physically with us in the room, the staff of the Ministry of Education, those who are joining us online, welcome everyone to the University of the West Indies Open Campus in Dominica. And I am very happy to have been asked, wrapping up quite a few things, and most of our courses are doing their final presentations and so on. But Charlene, Christian, and Marita Hyacinth be here and to be part of this discussion. One of the main themes of leadership in education is diversity. And so it is very important for inclusivity in our schools and in our environments. And I do remember when I was doing my own work, my own doctoral work, I went to see Mrs. Fontaine quite a bit. Education. So I'm very happy to have been asked to moderate for this evening. So our theme is celebrating abilities, embracing diversity, and their organizations have been doing in terms of creating those environments that can definitely be ways of. So this afternoon we will hear from Ms. Ernica Esprit from the Dominica Association of Persons with Disability, and she will be speaking on that organization at the DADP. Mrs. Natalie Murphy, who was the former president of the Dominica Association of Persons with Disabilities, but is still very much involved there in terms of creating an environment where people with disabilities have the avenues from Abilities Unlimited, and today she will be talking to us on the works of the Abilities Unlimited, as well as some of the misconceptions that people have about people with special needs. She comes from a family where there have been people with special needs, so she'll talk about her own lived experience in that regard. Mrs. Melina Fontaine, working with the Alpha Center. So she will talk about the experience of that particular group, and then she will move in to talk about the need for advocacy, and then Mrs. Octavia Timothy, who heads the unit responsible for special education, will talk about society's misconceptions and stereotypes, students' ability and potential. So I've told you what they're going to be talking about, and so I will just introduce them all, and then I will call them to do their presentation. So our first, Ms. Esprit, has been with the association for the past 8 years and has been serving in the position of executive director for people with disabilities, especially the blind and the visual impaired. Ms. Esprit took my public speaking class once, so I'm looking forward to seeing that in action this evening. So it's good to see you. Ernica, who serves as the chairperson of National Commission of Persons with Disabilities. She was one of the founding members of the Dominica's Association of Persons with Disabilities. And as I said earlier, she's currently the chair of the National Commission of Persons with Disabilities. So welcome to you as well, Mrs. Murphy. Our next panelist will be Ms. Ria Raymond, who is the acting manager at Abilities Unlimited. She has been working at Abilities Unlimited since January in decorative arts and bookkeeping at the organization. And she takes pleasure in working at the workshop and has learned skills that will help her in her future. For mentally handicapped, and she is former chief education officer, that is where I know her from, in the Ministry of Education. Prior to her role there, she was a special education coordinator for the ministry for 20 years. And so she's the chair now of Alpha Center. So Mrs. Melina Fontaine for almost 30 years at both primary and secondary level. Ms. Abraham is an avid writer and reader. Discussion this evening will be Mrs. Octavia Timothy, who is currently the coordinator of the special education unit of the Ministry of Education. So this week, Mrs. Timothy's show. She has worked in that role for 10 years now. She has a bachelor's in speech language therapy. Mrs. Timothy has a passion for supporting students with special needs and a long history of training teachers and principals to better meet the needs of these students. Give each speaker 7 minutes. So for Nikki and Mrs. Murphy, I will have to say 1 minute left. But for the rest of you, I will raise my little flag I have there to let you know when you have 1 minute left on your presentation. So we're with Ernica Esprit's presentation. She is from the Dominica Association of Persons with Disability. So she will speak about that organization as well as focus on community support for students with special needs. Ernica, I'm going to walk back to my seat, and as soon as I do, I will say something softly to you so you can know that.
Good evening, everybody. Excellent. DAPD this year is going to celebrate 40 years, and that 40 years have been for people with disabilities. And children, when you speak of children, DAPD for years has been visiting schools, and that is something we are continuing. Special education needs, they have their way to. We have had success stories with students in the education system, special education needs. We are proud to graduated from university as a blind student, and he started with DAPD. DAPD started until he reached high school, and he was introduced to the computer, and even Sean, teacher for the exam and the. So DAPD has been, and Jahida Dorival, she's a wheelchair user. DAPD will continue to speak about children with special needs. Children don't just want to be there for taking up space, for numbers. We want to be included and maybe just a little bit slower, but they can do it. And the community, for the past 40 seeing, I can see that the community is embracing students with special needs and education needs. How should I say it? The provisions they take, the Ministry of Special Needs units, they has come a long way in embracing and including children with disabilities and special needs. And special needs, quote unquote, normal disability, being an advocate. But the rest of the community can help or can improve or embrace children with special needs is that take out the barriers from society, because when there are barriers, the barriers that are there make the children and also the adults, everybody, disabled. So that is why we don't say disabled people, we say people with disabilities, because the barriers make them disabled. So removing the barriers, little by little, one by one, they will be included in society and live as normal a life as they can live. Thank you.
Right on time for those 7 minutes. Very good. Excellent, Nikki. Thank you very much for your presentation. And tonight, Ernika spoke on the DADP's role and how them as a community, as well as the outside community, can be a supporting role for students with special needs. And she did mention some of the students who have been supported right through mainstream schooling by the association. So thank you very much for that. Our next speaker is Mrs. Natalie Murphy. Mrs. Murphy is currently serving as the chair of the National Commission on Persons with Disabilities, and this evening she will speak for her 7 minutes on the work of the commission thus far. The commission started last year and its role in our society. Mrs. Murphy, I'm just going to walk back and then I will tell you that you can begin.
This panel discussion this evening, and I want to extend and express my heartfelt thanks to the Ministry of Education, and in particular, Mrs. Timothy, for the invitation and seeing the need to include the organization that I currently represent in this exercise. Some of you may or may not know of the Commission on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and I will just give a short background and say that this commission was established by the government of Dominica to answer to one of the articles in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Now, the government of Dominica in 2012 ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which went into force in 2008. This convention was negotiated and advocated for by persons with disabilities around the world. And after years of opposition, of, as I said, negotiation and you know, all kinds of reasons why we should or should not have a convention, the United Nations eventually agreed that this was a need. Our government, as I said, ratified in 2012 following the strong advocacy that the Dominica Association of Persons with Disabilities made for its ratification. And in this convention are contained several articles, one of which, of course, has to do with education, the right of persons with disabilities to education. But the purpose of the convention, I might just want to say, is to promote and protect the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by all persons with disabilities, and to promote respect for their inherent dignity. And the convention also defines what someone with a disability is, who is regarded as someone with a someone with a disability, and that it states that anyone with a long-term mental, physical, sensory, or intellectual impairment who with interaction with social barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. You will notice that I have, and if you go to the convention, I said it word to word, because me as a person, this is my Bible, because that is what I use. You know, we, and DAPD as well has been using to advocate, you know, and under the convention, another article speaks to the implementation, and that is where the commission comes in. The government was obligated to establish this convention to ensure that the articles contained therein are implemented. So the commission is comprised of 13 of us, represented across section of organizations and institutions working with persons with disabilities, including the special education units, the workshop for the disabled, the Izlukati School for Special Needs in the Kalinago territory, the Achievement Learning Center, Persons with Dominica Association of Persons with Disabilities. And its mandate really is to provide government with advice and assist government with the implementation of programs, legislation, activities, and other policies to ensure that the needs of persons with disabilities are addressed throughout the life of someone with a disability. And I was very pleased and quite elated yesterday when I was at the official opening to hear of the various measures and areas that the Ministry of Education is implementing to ensure that persons with disabilities are not excluded from the regular school system. And I can say that based on what I heard, that the ministry is implementing certain aspects of Article 24, which speaks to education of persons with disabilities. So we are getting there slowly. Ms. Esri spoke of the successes of where we have been, where we came from 40 years ago, yes, that advocacy and the right to education has always been on the top agenda of DAPD, and taking it to a next level with the Commission, we can say that persons with disabilities, the future is bright. When you speak about educating persons with disabilities, we think of the entire being. Not only do we speak about providing for them academically and so on, but there's also access to the physical environment. And then, yes, hearing that all the schools that have been built and are being built make provisions of access, and but there's much to be done. We know we have a shortage of probably manpower, special education teachers, sign language instructors, persons who are deaf-blind who would need special interventions. But nonetheless, we have come a long way based on where we were 40 years ago when I started with my advocacy. And together as a community, together as a country, we can achieve more. And that is why the support of those of us who are here and other members of the community is extremely important to ensure that the work of the Commission really gets going, and that we can continue to move even further in our advancements and providing for the needs of persons with disabilities, not only in special education, but in all areas. Yes? Thank you.
So far, so good with time. So when I teach public speaking, I tell the students, let it not be said and said to your shame that everything was on schedule until you came. So, Ria, you are next. I want to really thank Mrs. Murphy for speaking to us on the work of the Commission. And we look forward, as you said, the future is bright. And we are looking forward to the work continuing, and the government and the people of the Commonwealth of Dominica holding on to the things that we did promise when we participated in the convention, and we said that we were going to do certain things to make sure that we improve the lives of those with special needs. So we're looking forward to that bright future that you speak of, indeed. In our own way, UWI has started. We've had our special education training programs, and a lot of teachers have been participating in that. We've had our first one, and we have 2 other courses in that area. And so we are doing our own small part in terms of ensuring that we provide the training. And I did say earlier that Ernika took my class. Ernika was a student of mine in my mainstream classroom. So, you know, there's, in our own way, we are trying, and the future looks bright here for us as well, Mrs. Murphy. So our next presenter is Ria Raymond, and she is from Abilities Unlimited, as I said earlier in her bio. And tonight she's going to speak on the work of Abilities Unlimited, as well as some of the misconceptions that people have of people with special needs, primarily because she comes from a family that has members with special needs. Ria, I would like for you to come up to the podium and do your presentation from there. And so when I get back to my seat, I will tell you when your 7 minutes start, but I would like you to come to the podium, and the other panelists will do the same in their turn.
Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Ria Raymond from Goodwill. I work at Abilities Unlimited up at Goodwill, and we've been here since October 5th, 1964. So been here many years. A lady by the name of Elsie Pointe came over from Caribbean and taught blind persons how to weave baskets. So my mother was one of the ones who learned. So she became blind after tooth extraction. I don't know how it happened, but it happened like that. And she lost her sight in one of the eyes. So by the time they took her to Barbados, it was too late. Her sight was gone. So when she came back home, there was no work to do. Because by then, only normal people were working. So the lady told her to come on to work, so she did. And she's been there since inception. So I'm lucky to have that person in my corner. And at Abilities Unlimited, formerly Workshop for the Blind, we do basket weaving, craft items, and also doll making. And from the former manager, Ms. Anthony, I learned bookkeeping. I couldn't do it. It was a rough work. Numbers. And everything had to be balanced, so I learned a lot. And in turn, I became the act manager right now. So I'll see what happens, I'm gonna go from now on. And the workers I have there, they're very competent. They've been there from inception also. And I have 2 workers who are right now in Germany at Special Olympics. So we're waiting for them to get gold medals, hopefully. So yeah, it's Michael Detouche and Crispin Daly. We hope that represent us properly at the games. And I have 1 speech impaired and 1 hearing impaired. They all work uniformly. Instruction, they follow instructions, and we work wholeheartedly. Our work sometimes is strenuous, but we give it our all. So that's basically it. So, I mean, at Workshop for the Blind, it was very tough at the beginning because most persons didn't want to have any disabled person. Like my speech right now, I have a speech impairment. So what they did was, women came on board and helped them build their structure up at Goodwill. And since 75, they've been up there making baskets, letter holders, pick the basket on the basket, and the basket one, they'll do it for you. So I'll speak more about my speech. Sorry about that. I'm talking very fast because I'm nervous sometimes. That's what happens. So, and I will try to control it, try to see a speech therapist to see what happens. And I hope we do get someone so that my speech can be repaired. Thank you, everybody. Oh, yes. Well, my mother got blind when she was 9 years, and her mother, my grandmother, had to check out and stuff. But back then, disabled person wasn't too much in the corner. So what my mother did, my grandmother did her, she taught her basket weaving in the terms of vetiver and our local screw pine and coconut leaves, so she did that as well, occupy her. But she said when she knew she got blind, she was stressed. because one time you're sane, one time sight is gone. So shut down the stress, she didn't know what to do, because there wasn't no work for disabled person at the time. So that's how it is sometimes. But she coped, and we came through. So she has 5 children, and grandchildren also. And we help out every day. I bring her to work, to and back, so it's a pressure sometimes, most times. Yeah, but that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ria, and thank you so much for the work that you and your staff are doing at Abilities Unlimited. Your work is really exceptional, and I thank you very much for what you do. Our next speaker is Mrs. Melina Fontaine, who is currently working with the Alpha Center. So tonight she will be talking about her experience there with the organization, as well as speaking on the need for advocacy, both from parents and for parents of children with special needs. Mrs. Fontaine.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I almost wanted to say, I'm not coming to speak again. After the 3 of them, they are the people with the real stories, not me. My story is just about book learning and, doing stuff for people with disabilities. But when you hear it from the mouth of the person themselves, then you have a good idea of what is happening. So thank you, Mrs. Timothy, as coordinator for the Special Education Unit, and her team for inviting me here this evening to participate in this very important panel discussion. And I say it's important because it's needed. It's really needed. The awareness that is ongoing this week and the panel discussion this evening, I hope will reach a very wide listening and viewing public, especially the families who may have children with disabilities. Understanding is critical to the type of action to be taken in any situation, and I am stating this evening that if we are to celebrate abilities and embrace diversity as the theme suggests, then we must have a robust understanding of the need for special education, of disabilities, of children who are struggling with their learning, their behavior, and their social skills. And we must also recognize that diversity is embedded within our existence, and that failure to embrace it may put us and others at a disadvantage throughout our lives. My name is Melina Fontaine. Cuman has introduced me. And I am here as the chairperson of the Dominica Association for the Mentally Handicapped. I've been part of the association for a long time, since I entered the Ministry of Education, started as the Assistant Education Officer for Special Education, and move on from there. So I've been part of Alpha Center board, but when I retired, they were like, come and cheer. So I could not refuse. That's what we do. And I'm very happy to do it because you need people like us to come forward and do the volunteer work, okay? And the Dominica Association for the Mentally Handicapped, that's a group that is responsible for the Alpha Center, the school for children with moderate to severe mental challenges. So I'll tell you a little bit about Alpha Center. It was established, and I have to say hello to the coordinator of Alpha Center sitting all the way at the back, Brother Philogen. Hi, Brother Philogen. Okay. So he will know what I'm speaking the truth about Alpha Center. Alpha Center was established since 1974. So next year they'll be celebrating, Alpha Center will be celebrating 50 years of existence, by a group of concerned Catholics from the St. Alphonsus Parish in Goodwill. Group of people who came together, saw the need for providing education to children with special needs, and decided to do something about it. So they occupied a small room within the parish hall, and at that time they could only accommodate 12 children. And so they had 2 people and 12 children. They couldn't take more. However, there were so many more students who required special education services but could not be accommodated because the resources were just not available. In that little room, I think they moved on to about 24 students. And also in those days, many children with disabilities were kept home. We heard stories of children being locked up alone in the house while their parents went to work. The rest of the families went out. We heard stories of children who were put in a cage because there was really nobody to take care of them. So thankfully, we have moved past that and we don't hear those stories again. Sometime in the early 90s, as the group continued to work to address the needs of children with disabilities, and to be able to access resources that were available from the external agencies, the Association for Mentally Handicapped was formed and registered as an organization that could be recognized legally. And through its lobbying efforts, it was able to obtain a plot of land on McIntyre Lane from the government, and with constant fundraising was able to erect the building which now houses the Alpha Center. At one time, the school had a population of 45 students, and its program also included an outreach program for children who were homebound. So there was actually an officer who went to the homes, visited, and worked with the parents on educating their children, sometimes toilet training, sometimes feeding, and that kind of thing. Today, as a result of lack of resources, the outreach program no longer exists. However, the Alpha Center now offers the students a program of functional academics, vocational, and social skills that encourages them to become independent and helps them to eventually live productive lives after they have left the Alpha Center. One of the things that we do is recognize that every child is different, hence the diversity. And so as a result of that, every child has what we call an individual education plan. And we are very thankful to Ivana as a Peace Corps volunteer who is working with our teachers on doing much more with regards to development of individual education plans and curriculum that suits the needs of the children at the center. The staff can boast of a number of students who have now been successfully integrated into the Dominican society and beyond. So you heard Miss spoke about Crispin. Crispin was at Alpha Center and did well enough. He's a very independent young man, got his work at the Abilities Unlimited, and today he's representing Dominica in Germany. How nice is that, yes? And we can boast of other students as well. Okay. The Alpha Center also provides support to the parents of the students and very early on established a parent support group which evolved into a group known as PASIS, Parents Advocating for Children with Disabilities Inclusion in Society. That group has since gone on to establish the PASIS Development Center in Portsmouth. So there is this ripple effect. Today, Alpha Center uses technology to provide support to the parents of the children who attend the center. And besides keeping in constant contact with the parents and providing them with information, the teachers address their issues and questions as they arise in timely fashion. And parents have also been provided with online learning on topics of interest. One of the challenges that we face at the Alpha Center is the stigma which persons attach to the school because of the student population that it serves, children with disabilities. And as a result, many of the children enter the Alpha Center after experiencing years of failure within the mainstream regular school. So in other words, the children, most of them would go through the Office of Special Education. A referral would be made. Your child needs to be at Alpha Center. Parents remain in denial for years, so they will not take their children to be registered at Alpha Center until grade 6 national assessment realize that they are not going to be doing well in secondary school. And then, you know, that's the end, and they'll come to the Alpha Center. But by then, by then it's so much they have learned so much inappropriate that we always know that it takes more time to unlearn inappropriate behavior than to learn new behavior. So it is a problem. And so while it is not too late for them to enroll, it takes much more work for the teachers at the Alpha Center to work with them and get them to where they should be. If moderator would give me some of the minutes from her own. Okay. Because I want to speak a little bit about early identification and intervention, because I think that's very important. I am an educator, been in education almost, well, all my life, still is. But I'm also a school psychologist, so I studied to be a school psychologist. And part of my work as a school psychologist is to conduct assessment evaluations that will help to identify and diagnose the strengths and weaknesses of students' academic, personal, social learning. And our work is based on the premise that there is an important relationship between academic learning and positive mental health. And so we understand many of the issues that affect learning and behavior and provide a variety of services. And so I asked the question, and that is something that, you can think about if you want to ask a question about it, and the people listening can think about it. What would happen if children had appropriately stimulating and responsive environments in their daycare and preschool years, and high-quality instructional interactions in their early schooling, grade K, grade 1, and grade 2? What would happen if they had what they needed? We would have a very good society, because we would not see all the instructional disabilities that we are seeing in from grade 3, 4, and 5 and into the secondary school. And so the idea is that we have to make a strong case for early identification and intervention. And brain research of today is even making this case very, very, very much stronger. It is rather fascinating, because we now know that children's brains remain what we call plastic. That is, the brain has the ability to continue to make connections and to rewire itself. So you don't look at a little 3-year-old and say that the child has a speech impediment or some mental challenges and that he's going to remain like that forever. No. If we provide early intervention, there are so many things that we can do. And if we provide it early enough, then the brain has the ability to make the necessary connections, to rewire itself, so that that child can be doing differently. And so this is why I wanted to bring that out, for parents to know that you usually know when a child is a little different from the others. And no child is the same, so you cannot judge one child based on another child. But society has given us the indicators to tell us, okay, if by 3 years or even 4 years a child is not speaking, then you begin to be concerned about it and so on. So if we know that and you are seeing the behavior, then you have an obligation to seek some assistance for your child, and especially the parents, I'm saying that too. There's a neuroscientist out of Yale University who has been studying brain development, Sally Shewitz, and especially with reading difficulties and dyslexia. And all her studies have been suggesting that the earlier the intervention begins, the better the prognosis for most of the problems related to learning. So for example, in the area of reading, a lot of research is finding out right now that if a child is experiencing problems in what we call phonological processing, the child will have problems later on. But it is something that can be taught explicitly, that if time is taken with a child who is experiencing because they are experiencing the difficulties, but if time is taken to explicitly provide them with explicit instruction, step by step, then that can help with the problem and get them to read. Maybe not as early as a child who is not experiencing the problem, but enough that they can continue and be independent. So it is there. I'm not here to give you a lecture on brain development. Kimon, if you want me to give that, you'll have to ask me for another time. But I wanted to mention it to highlight the need for early identification and intervention. Yesterday, at the launching of the Week of Awareness, both the Honorable Minister for Education, Mrs. Octavia Alfred, and the Coordinator for Special Education, Mrs. Octavia Timothy, mentioned some initiatives already existing within the ministry that allows for that to happen. Okay, so for example, mention was made of a referral process that is in place, whereby the school staff, in a timely manner, can address areas of concern identified in students through a multidisciplinary team approach. So in other words then, teachers realize that Jackie is experiencing some issues, whatever the issues are, then this is brought before the principal, who sets up a team. Let us look at what is happening to the child and what can be done about it. Let us try some things and it's not working. Let us get somebody on the outside to help us. So that is in place and that is very good, and I'm hoping that the principals really come on board with it. They also referred to progress monitoring, and that was, the training was provided to the schools to allow staff to monitor and track the progress of students so that they do not fail or continue to fail. Again, training can be done from now, January to December, and if the practice is not in place, then it's a problem. So notwithstanding all of that, Mrs. Timothy, I lament the fact that there is some level of regression in the services being offered for children with special education needs within the Ministry of Education. Because there was a time that it was just one person in the office. We got to the point where we had more than one person. Now it's back to one person. So something has to be done about it, and I am in the position to advocate for that to happen. I also advocate for training of specialists in the field of special education, and among them I'm referring to somebody who is specially trained to work with the blind and children with low vision. We had somebody at the ministry, the person is now retired, so we need to that person, because it was a person with special training who worked with Loic Charles to get him to the point where he could go to university. And without that person, it's going to be difficult. We need a specialist in the area of hearing impairment. Mrs. Timothy is the last trained person, and she's going to retire soon. So, well, she's going to retire in the next 10 years, just so I don't put her business outside. But when she goes, you know, we need somebody else. And same thing with speech and language therapy. She's the lone speech and language therapist. And so when she goes, we need behavioral specialists to work with children with autism and attention deficit hyperactive disorder. And especially for autism, because nowadays, everybody you talk to, they have autism. And we need, and this is something I have to say since it's out in the public, be very careful before you say a child has autism. Autism is not the answer for every kind of behavior that you're seeing. And so I want people to be very, because I'm just hearing a lot of the child is autistic and I'm saying, okay, who did the diagnosis, all right? And this is not good. But we need behavior specialists, those people who can work with the children, because some of the conditions are not conditions that you can cure with medication. They cannot be cured. What you can do is work with the behaviors to get the behaviors to change and so on. So it takes a team effort to provide services for children with special education needs. One person cannot do it. An untrained teacher or a teacher with just the introductory course in special education cannot do it, no. We must have specially trained teachers to provide full-time special education services within our school system if we have to address the 30 to 40% of our student population who are continuously failing. We have made some strides over the past decades in the services that we've been able to provide to our students, and Natalie did mention that, and I'm glad that that is recognized. For example, because besides what she said, we have no counselors in all our schools, and they are taking care of the children's social, emotional needs, all right? But we need, and we also have some special education programs in our schools. However, there are still children who are in schools not accessing any support, and there are still children who are at home and not accessing their educational needs because the system cannot cater to them. So I end by making a plea to all those who can to make it happen for the children. At the same time, we celebrate their abilities. Let us also embrace the diversity, believing that every child can succeed to their potential. And a word to the parents that you be the first advocates for your children. Try and try and try again. However, do note that it takes the combined effort of government, non-government agencies, and civil society to address the special needs of our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Fontaine. You know, listening to you, I allowed you to go on because I was just so engrossed. But you know, I appreciate that there's so much that has been done, but there is a lot of work to do. And you know, the reality is that people like me can sit and talk all we want, but Mrs. Alfred is not Mrs. Alfred. So I make a mistake. Mrs. Timothy is one person, you know, in the entire ministry, and so we are really hoping that more people can be put in place to provide that assistance, and that more people will be interested in going all the way with the training. That too is something that, you know, for somebody to take their time and do a bachelor's and a master's in an area in special ed is a vocation in itself, you know, and there's a lot of training that goes with that. And I know you were telling me about your own experience in getting training, and you know, it's a lot of work that goes into that. So we are really hoping that Mrs. Timothy can get the support that she needs within the ministry. Our next speaker is Ms. Sarah Abraham, principal of Roseau Primary School, and today she'll be speaking about educators and how they can address issues of social inclusivity and peer relationships for students with special needs within our schools. So I invite Ms. Sarah Abraham to come forward. Ms. Abraham?
Thank you very much, Dr. Joseph. Good evening, everyone. So as Dr. Joseph mentioned, tonight I'm going to look at how educators address social inclusion and peer relationship of students with special needs within the classroom and school environment. That's a mouthful. So you may ask yourself what the social inclusion entails. So social inclusion, it covers all aspects of peer relationship and peer group dynamics, such as inclusion, inclusive behavior, peer acceptance and popularity, friendship, and intergroup relationship. Social inclusion may also refer to classroom-level constructs, such as classroom norms and social hierarchies. And the researcher, Lincino Garcia, of the University of Teacher Education in Switzerland, is the one who said that. I quoted from him. Now, there are several ways that educators can address social inclusion and peer relationship within the classroom we are looking at. So within the classroom, we know that most classrooms have a set design, but in a special ed classroom, you could switch up your sitting plan. Instead of having students just sit straight at you, staring at you, one of the things you can do is you can change it around, give them a horseshoe where they can at least see each other, interact with each other. Normal classrooms, you have the desk laid out in a particular way. But special ed, where you are looking mainly at having interaction one-on-one, you want to look at the children. For example, if at my school, Roseau Primary School, we do have a special ed class where our children get to interact with their teachers. It's a small group. And if you come into the classroom, you will notice that normally it is not, their sitting is not like the normal classroom, because the teachers have to move between them and talk to them, like I said, one-on-one. Another thing within the classroom or the classroom environment, you need to find some common grounds. For example, because you have an inclusive classroom, you have students at different grade levels, and you also have them at different age level. So you have to get them to interact with each other. So when you have common grounds, you may do a subject that, let's say, for example, you are doing mathematics, although you are doing, for example, a concept like addition, but you have different grade levels. So you have to structure the lesson so that the grade 1, the grade K, and maybe a grade 4 or 5 you have there, maybe doing addition, but they are doing it at the child's level. They will not be doing it as mainstream. So this is one of the differences that you must do. Also, you need to have the students work in small groups. They can work in small groups with each other, and it is very beneficial for them, because in that way they get to socially interact with each other. Yes, some of them have disabilities, some may be hyper, but when you place them well, it does work. Another thing that is very important with this set of children is to have socially inclusive language. You meet them where they are. You give them a lot of encouragement. You say to them, you can do it. I know you can. Why not try it? Some children may say no, they don't want to do it, but you give them that support and your language. You never say to them that they can't, that they are stupid, that you don't know why you have them in your classroom, and those kind of things. Yes, they may frustrate you sometimes, they may put you under stress sometimes, but your goal is to ensure that each day they learn a little something. It does not have to be a lot, but you come in with your lesson, whatever skills you want to teach them, and you ensure that when they leave for the day, whether it's a social skill or academic skill, but they do learn something. Another important thing that you can do is role play. Role play is very important in a special ed classroom. It gives them a sense of normalcy, and it also lets them know that they can take on different roles and be comfortable at it. So the teacher has to ensure that the students are comfortable at all times. Now, you also need to find ways to highlight the students' interests. You have to study them well to know what they are interested in, and you highlight that. For example, if a special ed child is a linguistic child and the child pays a lot of attention to language, you're going to have to work with that child. Yes, you will focus on the other areas, but at the end of the day, you want to have a happy child. So you spend some time with the child, maybe doing a poem, reading a story, and helping them. If it's math, then you can play some math games with them. But you need to really focus on their interests, and you need to highlight it a lot. You could put up their work in the classroom, even around the school. If you go to the special ed class at my school, like I said, you will see some of their work there. You will see the teachers giving them stars and encouraging them. The other part of my question, it asks, what are some success stories or examples of inclusive practices and positive outcome for students with special needs? I'm going to look at it at 2 levels because I did teach at 2 levels. So at the primary level, where I am at now, we have students who come in and academically they are weak, but the teachers work with them at such a level that they do get back into the mainstream. They will not be A students, but they will be able to cope with mainstream work much better than if you had just take them from grade K and they had no special ed class to go into. And some of them, when they get to grade 6, they do not just get EEs like some people would expect. No, they learn something and they are able to master a few content areas, a few concepts. Now, having taught at the secondary level, some students came into secondary school as very weak students. If you notice, I'm speaking on the weak ones. Special education also include the higher level performances. Yes, but I'm looking mainly at the weak ones. And I've noticed that they came into secondary school, some of them barely able to write their name. And you will not believe, I will highlight Goodwill Secondary and ITSS, where I was attached to, that the students, they were taught by the teachers, and when they got to fifth form, they did pass CSEC. No, they will not pass 10 of them, but they will pass some of them. And another thing at the secondary school that I noticed that was very interesting is that the special ed students, they are the ones who succeeded a lot at music, drama, arts. They did well, dance. They did very, very well there. Also for Goodwill Secondary, most of them in garment construction, they have done well. Home management, mechanic, they have done well too. And as I also said, also at ITSS, there are success stories. So in Dominica, I can say there have been success stories at the primary school and at the secondary school also. Thank you.
So, Mrs. Fontaine and Mrs. Timothy, I'm listening to Sarah talk there, and I'm an educator myself, I'm a teacher, but I'm listening to her talk there about the things that you have to do with special ed students, and say, Baba, me too, vai? Because it sounds like a lot of work. Isn't that true, Brother Philogen? Me too, vai? And I mean, as an ordinary teacher with quote-unquote normal school, whatever that means, there's quite a bit of work to do there, so I can only imagine. I'm listening to Sarah and I say, Kisa, that's a lot of work. But bless you, Sarah, and thank you so much for the work that you have been doing in terms of ensuring that you do meet the needs of special children within your school. And you've been working with special education students for a while, as in the other schools that you have been at as well, including Goodwill Secondary School and Isaiah Thomas Secondary School. Our final presenter for tonight is Mrs. Octavia Timothy, who heads the Special Education Unit at the Ministry of Education. And tonight, Mrs. Timothy will talk about societal misconceptions and stereotypes, and her discussion will aim at promoting a more accurate understanding of students' abilities as well as their potential. Mrs. Timothy. Clap for Mrs. Timothy.
Good evening. So much has been said. Probably the best was left for last, I'm not sure. Okay. As I was introduced, I'm the coordinator for special education within the Ministry of Education. And I supervise and monitor all programs that and services for students with SEN and special educational needs and disabilities. And Naomi Abraham is probably saying Mrs. Fontaine forgot her. So I do have my colleague who works with the schools on the north. She's part of my special ed team, and that's Naomi Abraham. And we have been happy to have Miss Ivana Oyeda with us for this year, who is a Peace Corps response volunteer, trained in special education. Now, special education needs and disabilities covered a very wide spectrum. And if you listen to the panelists tonight, everybody has a different story. Everybody has a different aspect of special education. And so each child with a disability, I think Mrs. Fountain said that, is different. If you see one child with autism, you see one child with autism. So it doesn't mean that all the children with autism are the same. You see a child with autism, the other one has autism, they are different. Okay? And that is why we are talking about diversity tonight, because everybody's ability is different. And so presently, I think much of the myths that surround people with disabilities, I think quite a bit of that has been dispelled already. And however, we still have stereotypes, we still have misconceptions about people with disabilities. And that may vary depending on what context you are in, but we still have that. For example, and I deal with a lot of parents who come to me with children with disabilities, with children with special needs. And one of the things I notice is helplessness, pity and helplessness. And I think that's not only for parents, but people assume that if somebody has a disability, that the person has to be pitied, okay? And the person is seen as being helpless. For example, a parent will come to my office with a 3-year-old child, and she will open the bottle for the child, put the bottle in the child's mouth. I literally saw a parent holding the bottle for the child. I'm telling her, he's 3, let him hold it. When she lets it go, he just let it go. And then he took her hand and put the bottle in her hand and put it back in his mouth. And I have to tell her, you are teaching him helplessness. If he can take your hand, put it in your hand and hold your hand, it means he can do it for himself. So, you know, a lot of times people with disabilities are treated like they are helpless individuals who cannot really do anything or contribute to society. But we know that's not true. And we have these examples of these very accomplished ladies here with us tonight. That is just a small fraction of people with disabilities who are definitely not helpless and can lead fulfilling lives. Okay, another misconception is that they have limited abilities. And that happens a lot within the classroom, where the children, their unique skills and strengths and potential, these are overlooked. And again, I am giving examples because I'm talking from experience. And I'm not singling out anybody, so I don't even want anybody to think, let me wonder if it's me she's talking about. No. But I know that there's a, you know, I visited a school, and I know definitely that this was a child with special needs. I went there the first time, and everybody was being taught, but the child was sitting at the back coloring. And I said, Miss, why is he coloring? Oh, that's all he can do. I went back another time, and the teacher is teaching, and the child is at the back coloring. He does have skills. He does have potential. But you have to tap into it to see what his skills are, what his potential is. You have to challenge him with something. So it doesn't mean that because a child is not at the level of the other children in the class, that that child doesn't have ability or that child cannot learn. We have to look, and we keep emphasizing that you look at the child's strength. You look at the child's strength and you use that strength to build on the weaknesses that he has. But if we continue to look at them as having limited ability, then we will never challenge them to do anything. Okay? Another thing is, and that one ties in again with the one I just said, that they lack intelligence. So one of the stereotypes that people with disabilities face is that people look at them as being less intelligent than those without disabilities. Sometimes you see somebody on a wheelchair, and the person will say, even if he's on a wheelchair, he's smart, you know. Being on a wheelchair doesn't mean that the person doesn't have intellectual capacity. Or especially, I worked with the deaf students for over 20 years. And people have a habit of saying, even though he's deaf, he's smart, you know. Even though he's deaf, he knows everything. But he does. There is nothing wrong with the brain of a deaf person. The only reason that they cannot, you know, probably do what we can do is because they cannot hear language. And you need language for almost everything in your life. They are competent in sign language and they can understand each other, but they cannot understand English. It's like taking a French person and trying to make them learn English. They cannot understand the English, they know sign language, but that doesn't mean that anything is wrong with their brain. If we could do some magic and unblock the air, then the deaf person would be just like you and I. And so when people say that person is deaf but they're smart, it always causes me to, I get a little angry about that because I said, well, of course they are smart, they have a brain. And we have had, and in our society, and I speak especially, I don't want to be biased, but because I worked with them for 20 years, I especially love the deaf people. And I regretted that, you know, there isn't more that is available to the people who are deaf. Because I taught them and I came across some very, very bright ones that if they were probably in, okay, I taught some very bright one that if the service was available to them, they could have gone much further than where they are now, okay? And some of them are at work and have been working for years and have been competent in their workplaces. And so that falls not only for the deaf people, but every other person with a disability. If the person doesn't have an intellectual disability that prevents them from functioning, then the person's brain works properly. And being on a wheelchair or having mobility issues or having sensory problems by being blind or deaf doesn't mean that you lack intelligence. Okay, and sometimes we also think that, not we, but people also assume that people with disabilities constantly need assistance and they cannot live independent lives. And I think that ties in with the first thing that I said. And they disregard the ability to adapt. And Fontaine was talking about the brain and plasticity. And the brain can accommodate for one area of deficiency. So if you are deficient in one area, the brain can accommodate for that deficiency. And so we should be able to allow people with disabilities to make their own decisions, engage them in decision making. Because sometimes we think we can sit in a forum, make decisions for people with disabilities and they are not included. Okay, but they have their own voice and they can contribute and make decisions that will make them better. And another thing that I have noticed is that there's a misconception that if my child goes among others with a disability, it will make them more disabled. And people say that all the time, and especially when somebody comes to my office and we have done an assessment and I look at your child and I think, you know, and we do not send every child to Alpha Center. I keep saying to the teachers, every child with a special need cannot go to Alpha Center. Alpha Center is for those with moderate to severe special needs or disabilities. And as much as possible, if we can include the children in the mainstream and allow them to achieve to their potential, we do that. But there are definitely children that we have to refer to Alpha. There are definitely children that we have to refer to Alpha Center or Isulukati and among other institutions. And one of the things the parents will say, I will not send my child there, it will make my child worse. So the parents have the misconception that if your child associates with others with a disability, that their disability is going to increase. But that is definitely a misconception. Your child disability is your child disability. Interacting with another child with a disability is not going to make your child's disability any worse than it is. In fact, the socialization and being able to be in an institution or in an environment where you are nurtured is better than having them in an environment where they will not get the assistance that they need. Okay? Because many times, as Mrs. Fontaine said, many times the children, you make the referral and the parents say, you know, my child is not going to a special school, and they send them to the mainstream school. And what happens is that they do not get the support that they need, they do not get the services that they need, and they end up, you know, failing. And after a few years, when they have lost so much, then they are sent to the special school, and by that time, there is so much damage control that needs to be done. Okay, so if your child has a disability and the child has to be at a special school, I know we are advocating for inclusion, but there are times there are some children who need to be at the special school so that they can be taught at the level that they are, and they can be embraced and taught in a way that they will succeed. And so if your child is referred to a special school, it doesn't mean that your child is going to be worse. It's going to make your child better. Your child will be able to achieve at his and her potential. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Timothy. And now I have some questions that I'd like to ask. I asked the person assisting with the technician work. There's a mic here that can be brought to the front as well, so that our panelists do not have to come to the mic. I can just stay here, and the panelists can use one of the two mics that we have roving. So I'd like to begin with Mrs. Fontaine, and I'd like to ask, what began your professional career working with students with special needs? Because you could have worked with any students you want. You didn't even have to be in education at all, but you chose to do this business. So what was the thing that really got you started in this particular area, Mrs. Fontaine?
So that's a loaded question. And it goes way, way back. I started my training in 1981, so that's a long time. When I was selected to go to Jamaica. Actually, I went to Jamaica not knowing what I was going to do. If you understand the whole business of going to study long ago, I went to Jamaica under the impression that I was going to study English, and got to Jamaica and realized that I was going to study special education. And so I spent 3 years. It was a 3-year diploma program where I was trained as a teacher, and then with a focus on special education. And the area of specialization was learning and emotional disabilities. So that's how I started at MICO. And as I said, it's a long journey because I did well enough to be the top student for MICO, to get a scholarship to return to UWI now, Mona, and to do the bachelor's. Again, we're focusing on the area of special ed because there's so much in special ed. Actually, the program in Jamaica at MICO, when they started, it was tailored specifically for Caribbean students because there was a recognized need for teachers to be trained in the area of special education, and nothing like that existed in the Caribbean. Most people had to go to the UK or to the US or Canada to get trained, and they were not coming back. So MICO set up a special program, and at the time, you know, a cohort of students would go up from the different Caribbean islands every year to MICO. So I went back to Jamaica to do the bachelor's, and that time now, my focus was on what was called clinical specialist. So again, it was a program that was tailored to meet the needs of the Caribbean. And we recognized that the Caribbean, we needed our own persons who could assess the children to find out what their problems were and so on. And so I was fortunate to be in that program. I'm happy that I was in that program because I just love, you know, doing the work. So there I was trained to do psychological assessment, educational assessment, and again, more in terms of working with the different groups of children because the area of special education is a very wide spectrum. Okay, so you have the children who are very low functioning, and then you move up the ladder until you get to the group that are gifted and talented. So it's a really wider spectrum. This is where the diversity comes in, because you see one child, you don't see every child. It's one child, and you have to deal with that one child. And then from there, you know, when you start studying, you climb. So I went to the States now to do my master's in again, special education, but this time I went into management and more assessment. So you get, you know, a rounded thing. And then finally did PhD studies in school psychology.
Excellent.
Yes, so this is why I do what I do now, and I could do the different things at every step of the way. So this is me retired now, but still doing stuff, because when you have the skill, it doesn't go away.
Very good. Yes, thank you. Mrs. Timothy, how have you seen special education services evolve in Dominica over time?
Again, that's a loaded question. In terms of, before I speak about the services, I would say generally that special education has evolved. Because, I mean, before, people hardly knew anything about special education or children with disabilities. And I know Mrs. Fontaine worked in that field for over 20 years, and she was definitely very instrumental in trying to get special education off the ground in Dominica and getting to dispel myths and misconceptions and getting people to know about the different categories of special needs and disabilities, and just opening up, you know, the society to what special education is all about. And presently now, I think there is a drive in, you know, globally for people to recognize people with disabilities and people with special needs, and that, you know, has come into our community, our country. And so the services that are available right now, some of them were not available before, because I know definitely we have, we can do assessments at the special ed office. We did have a assessment specialist a few, as up to last year, but she has moved on. And I mean, that is part of development. You know, the person has moved on. But I do assessments at the office, so that is a service that is available. It started with Mrs. Fontaine, it continues with us. And we have also been able to expose teachers a lot more to special needs and strategies and practices and how best to deal with students with special needs. So there's definitely also more training available, which wasn't available before. So there is more training available, and even, you know, on the internet there is so much. There are quite a few webinars that are, you know, sent to me, and I send them out to teachers. So there is, I think people are more open now to special ed than what existed before.
Very good. Ms. Abraham, at your own school, you provide special education programs. You have your own program. What are some of the major challenges you face while supporting these children at your school?
Okay, one of the major challenge is lack of material. We would want to do more individualized teaching, but because we do not have sufficient material, this is posing a problem. And also, we would also like more support from the Ministry of Education, more testing of our students, more guidance also to the
Timothy is one person,
teacher.
right?
I know, no, I want you that. Yeah, we would like more of that also. And we would also like the parents to be more involved. Don't just bring the students and expect some magic to be done. We need them to be supportive. We need them to be there and on board.
Thank you. Mrs. Murthy, I'm going to ask you a similar question. What are some of the challenges that people with special needs and disabilities, well, people who with special needs face in the Dominican community? What are some of the challenges?
Well, the challenges will vary in terms of the types of disabilities. For instance, a person who has a vision impairment, sight impaired, would experience great difficulties because first and foremost, they would have to have a teacher trained to teach persons with vision impairments. Right now we just heard that there is no one at the moment performing that role, but based on the experience and the work that has gone on in the past, we can see that, with such a teacher, children or young adults, children who are sight impaired, can really perform to the best, at the highest level. You speak about a person who has a sight impairment. The tendency most times is to get that person to learn Braille, but we don't have any Braille specialists in Dominica. We don't have anybody teaching Braille in Dominica. So the best thing for the child to have is the assistive device, a computer. Mm-hmm. And thankfully, and thank God for technology, for the invention of screen readers, persons who are blind and visually impaired can efficiently and competently use a computer because there's a voice program, Then you also have the person who is deaf and hard of hearing. Mrs. Fontaine spoke about, the successes that we have had with the school for the deaf, and right now that is no more. So we have their students, I think, who are in need of, that special skill and that special knowledge, and unfortunately it is not available. There's also the issue of a person who is mobility impaired, wheelchair user, might not be able to access the physical environment, and then again I am pleased to know that this is being addressed in terms of provision of access to the physical environment. And most times we make the mistake and we believe that if there is a ramp at the entrance of a building, that is access. But if we have to go to Article 9 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, you will see and learn and understand what exactly we mean when we talk about access to the physical environment and public buildings. And then you have those with the mental challenges, slow learners, you have to have the teachers, you have to have the specialists who work with these children. So it is a whole range of areas and challenges that persons with disabilities, children who have to access the education system and acquire lifelong learning, that they have to have the equipment, the programs, the policies, the environment, the enabling environment to ensure that they can successfully become what they would want to be in the future. I just want to state here, as we spoke about Lowick Charles, we all know how Lowick has been able to attain a university education, a degree. And only today, this afternoon, just before I came, I got a WhatsApp message from him telling us in that DAPD that he has been accepted by a university in Texas to pursue his master's in social work. So, and that made me very proud, very, very proud. So yes, well, it's part of the challenges, Lowick is a success story, and as we say, it can be done with the necessary support, equipment, facilities, and all what it takes to ensure that we have an all-inclusive society and persons with disabilities really develop to their fullest potential. Yes?
Thank you very much. And Anika, Mrs. Timothy spoke about some of the misconceptions as far as they refer to the education system. But for you, what misconception or misconceptions would you like to clarify for the public as it refers to persons with disabilities?
Okay. There is a statement, people with disabilities are gifted people. And I heard that recently. People with disabilities are not gifted people. People with disabilities are like any other people. I mean, okay, a blind person, they would say, they're hearing stronger, they're hearing more.
Oh, that's what you mean by gifted. Okay, I was
No,
wondering.
well, when I say gifted,
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
like, extra, right, extra thing, extra, they can do extra,
Like
genius,
superpower.
right,
Okay.
superpower, and extra, they have an extra sense, they have extra senses, they have, no. As a blind person, we depend on our hearing more. So you have your eyes and your hearing. You will use your eyes and your hearing. We don't have our eyes, so we have to depend on our hearing. So something you might not take note of, we will take note of it. So that, and another thing, Mrs. Timothy spoke about the PT. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh. That. Yeah, we can do things. We can do things. We can do everything for ourselves. See, Mrs. Murphy and her husband are two blind people in their house. So, people with disabilities, they can do everything. We can do everything you can do, we can do it too. We have our way of doing it. We have our way of getting around it, but we can do it too. There was something else.
That's it for me? See, you don't have a superpower because you're going to think of something else and now you don't remember. Thank you very much.
So you see, that just proved my point.
Yes, you do not have superpowers.
And another thing, there is, when you do things for us, involve us, because we are the experts. Like Mrs. Murphy said, a ramp in front of a building is not a ramp. It's not access. Because most of them will just cannot access them. And most times ramps are for wheelchair access. So anything you do for us, involve us, or involve somebody that representing us that know. So when you're doing something, do it properly, and there is no need, you will have to go and fix it. There is a saying, we have nothing about us without us.
Thank you very much. And so my final question is for Ria. Ria, what is one thing you'd like the people listening to know about people with special needs? What is one thing you'd like all those listening to know about people with special needs?
Well, seeing that we're all human beings, it's just that they're born different in a certain way. Some can hear, some can see, some can't walk, some can't talk. So I don't think there's a big difference though. It's just that we do certain things that they can do, and we do things that they can't do. So I guess in the future we have to accept everybody as they are and see everybody as a human being person who is qualified to do everything that we can do to the best of our ability. Yes.
All right, thank you very much. And so I really want to thank my panelists for being with me this evening. we had Ms. Ernika Esprit, who is from the Dominica Association of Persons with Disabilities, and she spoke about that organization's experience over the past 40 years, and she focused on community support for students with special needs, particularly some of the success stories from the Dominica Association of Persons with Disabilities. Mrs. Natalie Murphy, who was once the head of that organization, is now the chair of the National Commission on Persons with Disabilities. And she spoke of the commission, which started its work last year, as well as its role. Ms. Ria Raymond is from the Abilities Unlimited. She spoke about the work of the organization, and she looked at some of the misconceptions about persons with special needs and focused as well on her own family, where there is someone with special needs within her family. Mrs. Melina Fontaine, former chief of education, spoke about the work of the Alpha Center primarily, and also spoke of the need for advocacy for and from parents of children with special needs. And she also talked about the work of the Ministry of Education, since she had worked there for a long time. Ms. Sarah Abraham, the principal of Roseville Primary School, spoke on how education addresses social inclusion and peer relationships of students with special needs. And Mrs. Octavia Timothy, who is the head of the Special Education Unit in the Ministry of Education, spoke of the societal misconceptions and stereotypes, promoting a more accurate understanding of students' ability and potential. I thank all these lovely ladies for being with us this evening as we spoke on the topic, celebrating abilities, embracing diversity. I now return the microphone to our chair, Ivana.
Sorry, is there any questions for the girl? Because I have one.
Oh, you'd like to ask a question?
Yes, please.
The audience was sparse at the time, and so I took over the question. But now there seems to have been a superpower, and the audience has multiplied. Yeah. So I'm fine if you have a question. Yes, sure. Who are you directing it to?
I would like to direct it to Ms. Timothy. Is that okay?
Mrs. Timothy.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Jerome, cinematographer. I recently did a documentary with a special education, special ed student, and what occurred is we observed that she had a teacher assisting her. She couldn't hear, so she had a teacher, and she could communicate with her teacher very well, and it was really good. But her parents couldn't communicate with her, you know, and it kind of touched me, and I wanted to ask: is there anything being put in place? We all focus on the special educated children, but they have parents, they have brothers, they have sisters, and is there something that's been put in place to educate the parents and the family to learn how to communicate with the student? Because, you know, it's like we said earlier, we have this perception as if we treat them like they can do this and they can do that, and yes, we can educate them, but then they go back home, you know, we spend like a few hours with them, and then they go back home for the rest of the day, and they have that influence from their parents that treat them as I kind of don't want them to keep, you know, handing the bottle in their mouth, you know? So is there anything in place to educate the family?
My experience, and even tonight, before I even answer you, even tonight, as we have this discussion, I am hoping that parents can rise up and be advocates for their children. And my experience, as I said, I taught deaf students for over 20 years. And my experience with that in our society, the parents were just not interested in learning sign language. At the school at the time, we had almost 30 students. And we offered sign language to the parents, and we offered it for free. And out of the 28 parents, we probably started with 10. And within a few weeks, it dwindled to 3. And then so we said, okay, probably we should ask them to pay, because if they pay, then they'll have ownership of it, and they'll want to come. So we put it at a fee. Maybe I think it was probably like $20 for the month, something like that. And we only got 2 parents out of 28 students. And the 2 parents came maybe for 3 weeks, and then they stopped. And so, you know, whenever we have a PTA, we try to find out why is it you do not want to learn sign language. And one of the parents said, I don't want to sign on the road to my child for people to say my child mumu. And another one said, I have my own way of communicating. And somehow we could not get it into their head, because we are saying you have a child who is normal, you have a child who has no difficulty, a typical child. And when that child gets to the teenage years, there is so much talking that you have to do. And we are telling them, if the child is deaf and you cannot speak to that child, how much guidance are you going to give that child? But we could not get them to be interested. And so one of the plans that we do have, I think that is something that we discussed from last year, that we are planning a parents' conference. So that will come up sometime in the new school year. Okay, so we're going to start somewhere. But in my experience, what I have experienced with our society is that not many parents with children with disabilities advocate for their children. They prefer to leave it to the teachers to do something, but they themselves don't do that much, and they don't say that much. And so we are hoping that, you know, that can change.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Timothy. Is there anyone else from the audience who has a question?
Good evening. My question is, well, sorry for being late, but what is being done to decentralize the classes? Because we know about the school up in Goodwill, but we are not hearing nothing about a school like that in Portsmouth or in Vika. So what is being done to decentralize it? Because there are disabled children around the island, and what can be done to get, if we're not decentralizing it, what can be done to get those children to come down to Roseau so they can have access to education? The next thing, is there trained teachers in all our primary schools to deal with children with disabilities?
Let's back at Mrs. Timothy. So 2 questions, access and decentralization and training of teachers.
Okay. And you know, these are interesting questions, because these are questions that have been coming up, and these are issues that we have already discussed. In terms of decentralizing, we know definitely most people, when you refer a child, you say Alpha Center. And we know Alpha Center is in Roseau, and it's difficult for probably a child from Paybush to come to Roseau. What we planned before was to provide transportation and probably start from Portsmouth to come down. We looked at it, and, you know, logistically, there were still children who would have been left out. And so we are trying to rethink. And also another, there is also, well, I don't want to jump the gun to say that, but there are things that are being planned in terms of catering for the children who cannot access the service in Roseau. It's, you know, it's been planned, so I don't want to say too much now, but we are definitely looking at how that can be decentralized, because definitely it's difficult for those who are so far away to access the education. We do have some of the children, we do have some children at the Roosevelt Douglas Primary School, and, you know, there's a pull-out program for them, but it still cannot accommodate everybody. And so there are plans that definitely will look at that decentralization.
And in terms of the training?
Oh, thank you, Mrs. Fontaine. How could I forget that? We do have a special school in the East, that is the Isulukati Special Needs School, and that is in the Kalinago territory, and so it caters for the children in that area. Recently, well, the PASIS Center, at first it was more like a respite center, and they have plans to become a school. But in the meantime, you know, work is being, I wouldn't say work, but in the meantime, there are things that have to be put into place so that PASIS can be accessible to as many. You know, there are a few institutions, but yes. So you have Isulukati in the east, you have PASIS who has come up in the north. So there are plans, definitely, for the children who are out of the Roseau area.
And training for teachers in the schools now?
Right. We have done, in terms of training, I cannot say that there are teachers in the school with bachelor's or master's. We do have a few people here who have master's in special ed, and I know there's one teacher who has a bachelor's in special ed. But in terms of every school, we do not have a teacher at every school. But what we try to do is have training with the teachers and ensure that they go back to their schools and replicate that training so that the other teachers in the school would benefit from that. So that's how it is for now.
Okay. Any other question before I pass back? Hold on.
Who is monitoring that the training continues in the
unit?
The Ministry of Education has an organizational structure. And so you do have the district education officers who are responsible for the schools in their districts. And so when the training is done and, you know, we make the officers aware that the training is done, they are invited to the training. And so we are hoping that even as they monitor their schools, that they'll monitor that that training continues within the school.
Thank you very much for those questions. And so I now pass the baton back to Ivana, who will give her own final remarks as well as the vote of thanks. Ivana?
Well, thank you to everybody who is here listening and participating in today's. I myself sat here and listened to the insights from our panelists. I was immediately turned to the direction of the three-worded motto of the Ministry of Education, and I think that so concisely summarizes our purpose here today. Every learner succeeds. A statement that is so simple in its intention, yet so complex in its practice. And that is really what we were trying to tackle here today and start to uncover all of that conversation. As chairperson of today's event, it is my honor and privilege to give a vote of thanks to all those involved in making today's panel a success. To Ms. Esprit, who mentioned very able to continue with this theme of embracing persons with disabilities and special needs, is to begin by breaking barriers in society, and that bringing the community together is so vital in this conversation and in this work. To Mrs. Murphy, who had an immense amount of direct quotations from the United Nations mandate and conventional findings, right? Especially the quotation relating to promoting the dignity of persons with disabilities across sectors. We primarily focused on education here, but across sectors. To Ms. Raymond, who shared not only a personal story around her mother, but also her own personal story around overcoming the learning around numbers to be successful at bookkeeping and introducing it into Abilities Unlimited. To Mrs. Fountain, who started her speech around the importance of having a robust understanding of disability and needs in order to ensure an early intervention, and not just a teacher that is trained, but a team of people that are able to provide all of the multifaceted supports that are necessary. Ms. Abraham, who provided a plethora of teacher recommendations, things that teachers can immediately take after listening to this and that parents can take with them to incorporate more support and accommodations, such as altering the classroom layout, altering the curriculum. And finally, to Mrs. Timothy, who dispelled multiple misconceptions around persons with disabilities and stated how important it is to have persons with disabilities in the room where the conversations and the decisions are being made about persons with disabilities. Something, again, that is so simple in intention, yet so complex, apparently, in practice, that we have to be able to address. Before I continue with the list of thank yous for today, I must highlight those learners that succeeded that were mentioned today. Mr. Charles, Mr. George, and Ms. River, all persons from DAPD who were able to succeed through the school settings. To Mr. I may mispronounce the name, I'm sorry. To Mr. Michael Tetush and Mr. Daly, who are representing Dominica in the Special Olympics in Germany, who were mentioned here today, and work at Abilities Unlimited. To Alpha Center for growing from 12 students in one classroom to 4 classrooms with 49 students in less than 50 years. And to the multiple high school students across Dominica who entered with foundational literacy and writing needs, such as struggling to write their own name, and yet were able to succeed by passing multiple CXC exams. These are the stories that we want to continue and that we must be able to highlight regularly. I'll continue. A thank you to the Ministry of Education, Human Resource Planning, Vocational Training, and National Excellence. Thank you to OECS Pearl Initiative, the University of West Indies Open Campus, and Digicel. A thank you to our panelists, Mrs. Octavia Timothy, Coordinator of Special Education Unit at the Ministry of Education, Human Resource Planning, Vocational Training, and National Excellence, Ms. Sarah Abraham, Principal at Roseau Primary School, Mrs. Melena Fountain, Chairperson of Dominica's Association for the Mentally Handicapped, Mrs. Rhea Raymond, Acting Manager of Abilities Unlimited, Mrs. Nathalie Murphy, Chairperson of National Commission of Ms. Ernika Esprit, Executive Director of Dominica's Association of Persons with Disabilities. A thank you to our moderator, Dr. Kimon Joseph. Thank you to our media, Carrie FM, and to the audience members that are here, both in person and virtual. For all those interested in following along with our week of events, remember to check the Ministry of Education Facebook page to register for our Walk for Children with Disabilities, scheduled for this Saturday, June 24th at 3 p.m., starting at Roseau Bayfront. Collected will be going to support specialized education centers here in Dominica. A final thank you to all for taking the time to be here today and listen to the insightful contributions of our panelists as we together celebrate abilities and embrace diversity. Have a wonderful evening.
And it's on this note we want to say thanks as well to Rudolph Thomas and the Sons for allowing this broadcast to go through from 6 o'clock this evening. Normally on a Tuesday night like this, we bring you Sports Connection. Host of Sports Connection. Thanks to our good friend Simeon Albert and the rest of the Dominica Labour Party team for allowing the broadcast to go a little beyond 8 o'clock. Thank you so much, Mr. Asafan and the rest of the team for embracing children with special disabilities, as well as Mr. Rudolph Thomas, Mr. Ruben Thomas, and the staff of Rudolph Thomas Enterprises. And thanks to the Ministry of Education for making all this possible on behalf of my IT specialist and technician, that's Ted Johnson, for ensuring that we got the best quality. Thank you so much, Ted. I am Steve Vidal, your announcer / technician, saying good night and stay tuned for the next level, a delayed edition. Good night. Catch you tomorrow. Don't forget to join us at the Dominica State House, the State House conference room, for an important broadcast tomorrow from 10 o'clock, as well as from the Prime Minister's office tomorrow at 10 o'clock on our split frequencies, and then again back to the State House conference room from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Good night, everyone.